After the release of Ocarina of Time, the gaming world waited with bated breath to see what Nintendo would do next. Somehow they had managed to create a game that not only redefined an entire genre, but was almost immediately hailed as a masterpiece by both critics and audiences alike. It would go on to win award after award after award, and even today, Ocarina of Time sits as the highest rated video game ever. So it was no wonder why people were asking, what's next? How do you improve on perfection? Well, you don't. Released only a year and a half after Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask stands out as this anomaly of gaming. What started life as a simple expansion to Ocarina soon grew into something else entirely. A full sequel built by a skeleton crew using recycled assets on a deadline that constantly loomed overhead. By all accounts, it was a recipe for disaster, a shameless cash grab meant to leech off of Ocarina's success. But against all odds, the game that emerged was something that Ocarina of Time never was and never could be. Darker, weirder, and far more mature. It is, without a doubt, one of my all-time favorite games, thanks to its myriad of themes, incredible writing, and the overall feeling of humanity contained within. So join me as we take a look at the beautifully depressing masterpiece that is The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. To fully appreciate Majora's Mask, we need to go back to the very beginning. The year is 1998, and Ocarina of Time has been released to both critical and commercial success. Already, many members of Nintendo's staff are hard at work on the second Zelda game that will be released for the N64. But it's not Majora's Mask. Instead, what they were working on is the now infamous project known as Ura Zelda. Ura Zelda, which roughly translates to Another Zelda, was intended to be a new version of Ocarina of Time exclusive to the Nintendo 64 disk drive peripheral. According to an IGN interview from November 1998, Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to use Ura Zelda as an opportunity to add features that didn't make it into Ocarina of Time, such as new areas and dungeons, due to, as he put it, time constraints and other reasons. Besides the promise of new areas and dungeons to explore, Ura Zelda would also have redesigned versions of the original dungeons, featuring entirely new layouts, puzzles, and item locations. The task of designing these updated dungeons was given to Ocarina of Time's dungeon designer, Eiji Aonuma. However, Aonuma was uninterested in the project. In an Iwata-ass article about Majora's Mask 3D, Aonuma would tell late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata that, when we made Ocarina of Time, we made those dungeons thinking they were the best we could make. That's when Miyamoto-san asked me to remake them, so I hesitantly obliged. But I couldn't really get into it. Instead, Aonuma would spend his time designing completely new dungeons in secret, as he found that a lot more engaging and interesting. Eventually, while still very early in Ura Zelda's development, Aonuma grew up the courage to ask Miyamoto-san whether I could make a new game. To his surprise, Miyamoto agreed to Aonuma's request, but on one condition: the entire game needed to be completed in a single year. Hesitantly, Aonuma accepted, and work on Zelda Gaiden officially began. As for Ura Zelda, it was never fully released to the public, with what remained of the project eventually becoming Ocarina of Time Master Quest, released on the GameCube in 2003. Development on Zelda Gaiden, or Zelda Side Story, officially started in January 1999. Eiji Aonuma would become the supervising director, while Miyamoto remained on as the sole producer, having the final say in anything that happened. Shortly into development, Miyamoto began calling back members of the original team that had worked on Ocarina of Time, to the point where almost 70% of the Zelda Gaiden team was people who had worked on Ocarina of Time. One such member was Yoshiaki Koizumi, who, alongside Miyamoto, would help to create some of the game's most defining features. Before joining the development team, Koizumi had been designing a cops and robbers themed board game where the objective was to catch a criminal in 1 week. The game would have taken place in a compact game world that could be played over and over again. Koizumi agreed to help develop Zelda Gaiden as long as they could reuse the time passage system from Ocarina of Time and have the game revolve around repeating the same moments in time. The game was initially going to take place over the course of 1 week, but this was soon reduced to 3 days to make it much easier for the player. Because the team developing the game was so small, around 30 to 50 people, and they had such a limited amount of time, Zelda Gaiden couldn't be a grand adventure on the scale of Ocarina of Time. As such, it was decided that the game would only consist of 4 main dungeons and have a far greater focus on side content. Miyamoto wanted the game to be so dense that the player would discover a greater depth to the game with each playthrough. Creating a game in the same engine as Ocarina of Time allowed the team to expand on ideas they hadn't been able to with the previous title, the most notable example being the mask system. The team believed that it would be fun if Link transformed and gained new powers every time he put on a different mask, and once they decided on the mask system, everything just fell into place. After these opening meetings, Miyamoto largely took a back seat in development. He would act as a beta tester in the latter half of development, later joking that he was complaining about this and that. This hands-off approach was largely because he trusted the staff working on the game. In fact, this sense of trust was largely shared by most of the game's staff. In a developer interview from May 2000, Miyamoto explained the team's creative process. Everyone gets together to discuss the overall specs. We start by tossing ideas back and forth for 2 to 3 months. Once our vision is more or less solidified, everyone goes off and starts working on each individual section. Aonuma followed this up, adding, "As long as we all have a common goal in mind, everyone is able to work towards it on an individual basis. Of course, the only reason we were able to take that approach was thanks to Ocarina of Time." It wouldn't be until around May 1999 that Nintendo would reveal that a new Zelda game would be released before the end of the year. Later in August, Miyamoto would confirm in an IGN interview that Ura Zelda and Zelda Gaiden were 2 different projects. This was because many people at the time believed that the 2 projects were one and the same. This was also around the time when the public was given its first look at the game during Space World 1999. Development significantly ramped up during the latter half of the year. With the team working under such a severe time constraint, almost every single member of the team worked overtime, with many of them choosing to sleep at the office. By this point, Miyamoto could see that the team was overworking themselves, so he pulled Aonuma aside and told him they could delay the game. Aonuma, however, yelled at him, since the team was already so close to finishing. He truly wanted to finish the game before the year's end, later saying that, "It felt like something was pushing me on." The team's hard work would finally pay off on April 27, 2000, when The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask would release in Japan. It would then be released in North America on October 26th and in PAL regions on November 17th. Majora's Mask saw critical acclaim upon release, with critics praising the game's graphical improvements over Ocarina of Time. This was thanks to Majora's Mask requiring the use of the N64 expansion pack, which gave the console an extra 4 MB of RAM. This extra power allowed the models to look a lot cleaner and the interiors of buildings to be fully rendered in 3D, unlike building interiors in Ocarina, which were 2D images. The story was also praised for being far more original than Ocarina's, but many critics remarked that the game's darker tones and heavier subject matter wouldn't have the same appeal as its predecessor. In some ways, this was true, as Majora's Mask wasn't as widely praised among fans. Many players found the time limit to be stressful and greatly restricted the things they could do. The game's smaller scale when compared to Ocarina of Time was also greatly criticized by players, and many saw it as lazy that the developers would reuse so many assets from Ocarina. It would be a few years before fan opinion on Majora's Mask would begin to shift, specifically around the release of The Wind Waker in December 2002. With the release of a new 3D game, people began to take another look at the one that came before it, eventually realizing that it wasn't as bad as they had thought it was, and deeming it a classic. And thus, the Zelda cycle continues. Jokes aside, the change from being labeled as the black sheep of the series to being consistently hailed as one of the best Zelda games in the series is genuinely impressive. I can't recall another game in the Zelda series seeing a shift in public opinion this drastic outside of one or two exceptions, and at the same time, I can't think of a game that deserved it more than Majora's Mask. In 2011, Nintendo released Ocarina of Time 3D, a complete remake/remaster of the N64 title for the Nintendo 3DS. It boasted updated visuals and quality of life changes, allowing a new generation of players to be introduced to one of the greatest games of all time. But we don't care about that right now. After Ocarina of Time 3D was released, many fans began begging for Majora's Mask to receive the same treatment. What's funny about this is that history is kind of repeating itself now with the rumored Ocarina of Time remake for the Switch 2. Well, I mean, rumored at the time of me recording these lines, because I don't know if the game will be announced by the time this video goes live. It wouldn't be until the Nintendo Direct on November 5th, 2014 that Majora's Mask 3D was finally announced. It was then released a few months later on February 13th, 2015, alongside the new 3DS XL system. However, Majora's Mask 3D has gone on to become one of the most divisive Zelda remakes due to the sheer amount of changes it made to the original game. Many of the changes that were made in Ocarina of Time 3D carried over to Majora's Mask 3D, such as the updated visuals, better controls, etc., etc. But it was the various changes to the gameplay that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. The one that everyone brings up is, of course, Zora swimming. In the N64 version, swimming as Zora Link is fast, fun, and controls really well. It was hands down the best part about the Zora mask, and players absolutely loved it. So when the 3DS version came out, you can imagine how upset fans were when they found out that Zora swimming had been completely reworked. Now, Zora Link's default swim is slow and unexciting, while the original Zora swimming was now tied to the magic meter. But Zora Link unfortunately wasn't the only one that saw changes to his movement. Deku Link's water hopping speed was toned down compared to the original. Before, you were able to use a spin attack to gain some extra momentum while hopping from platform to platform across water. In Majora's Mask 3D, however, he now seems to lose momentum when he performs a spin attack, which can make some of these lily pad jumps in the swamp a lot more tedious. The changes to the bosses are also brought up pretty frequently when talking about the bad things about Majora's Mask 3D. Each one now has this giant weak spot in the form of a massive eye that appears when you stun them, which just kind of feels insulting. It's a good addition from a story and lore standpoint, as the eyes are meant to represent the influence Majora has over the bosses, but from a gameplay standpoint, their addition largely removed player freedom, as many of the bosses didn't have one specific weakness and could be fought in multiple ways. Some boss fights are decently improved, like Yorg now having a second phase. Others, like the Twin Mold fight, became a lot more annoying thanks to how the Giant's Mask and the fight as a whole were completely reworked. This isn't to say that every change Majora's Mask 3D made was bad though. The Bomber's Notebook is no longer a missable item and is now a lot more useful, as it tracks every side quest, can alert you of when certain events are occurring, and keeps track of where every character is via a live updating schedule. The bombers around Clocktown now also give you rumors about various side quests, which can help you figure out how to start them. One of the biggest changes, however, was the Song of Double Time. Now, it allows you to skip to a certain hour of the day rather than just the next night or dawn. This makes waiting for certain events far less of a hassle, and it shortens the time it takes to complete certain quests, like the Anju and Cafe quest. You are also able to completely control the camera on new 3DS XL systems with the C-Stick. Between the two versions, I hesitate to say that one is definitively better than the other. The N64 version has the better boss fights, superior movement, and feels a bit more challenging overall. The dated graphics also feel like they fit the tone of the game more than the updated models of 3D. The 3DS version, however, is more beginner-friendly and has quality of life changes that make the overall experience a bit smoother. but that smoother experience comes at the cost of many features from the N64 original that fans love. I don't know if I prefer one version over the other, but I do have a soft spot for Majora's Mask 3D since it was my first Zelda game. I told this story back in my 5,000 subscriber special, but in April 2015, my aunt took me shopping as an early birthday present because she wouldn't be in town for my actual birthday in May. We ended up going to GameStop, and while browsing the 3DS games, I saw Majora's Mask 3D. I remembered it being a game that a friend of mine had talked about before, as well as the one that one of my favorite YouTubers at the time, Peanut Butter Gamer, had mentioned as being his favorite. So I figured that if I wanted to get into Zelda, I might as well start with this one. My aunt got me the game, I started playing when we got home, and the rest is history. The 3DS version of Majora's Mask is ultimately what I chose to replay in order to get footage for this video. However, I used the 4K texture pack made by Henrico Magnifico to give you all a better viewing experience, as well as the Project Restoration mod by Leo at Lino, which restores mechanics from the N64 original to the 3DS version while adding some quality of life features. Thank God for Project Restoration. Ultimately, the version you decide to play comes down to what you want specifically and what version is the most easily accessible to you. If you want better gameplay and don't mind losing some quality of life features, you should check out the N64 original. If you want more modern visuals and changes that make the game a lot more welcoming to newcomers, then you should try the 3DS version. I know that we've all seen the Nerol video on Majora's Mask 3D, but it's genuinely not as bad as everyone says it is, I promise. The story of Majora's Mask begins sometime after Ocarina of Time, with the same Link from that game being our protagonist in this one. After Link is sent back in time by Zelda to relive his lost childhood, he goes on a personal journey in search of Navi, his fairy companion who departed once his quest had been completed. His search leads him to the Lost Woods, where he is ambushed by a Skull Kid wearing a strange mask and his two fairies, Tattle and Tail. The trio then rob Link, stealing both Epona and the Ocarina of Time. Link gives chase, but he ends up falling down a large hole, which transports him into the parallel world of Termina. Landing at the bottom, Link finds himself trapped by the Skull Kid, who places a curse on the hero and transforms him into a Deku Scrub. As the imp floats away laughing, Tattle is left behind unintentionally, leaving her to begrudgingly help Link so she can be reunited with her brother. Following the path of the Skull Kid, the two of them find themselves inside a clock tower, where they meet the happy mask salesman. He tells Link that he's been following him and can return him to his true form if the hero recovers the Ocarina of Time. In exchange, the salesman asks Link to recover the precious mask the Skull Kid stole from him, the one that he's currently wearing. The catch is that Link needs to do this before the salesman leaves town in 3 days. Without any other option, Link agrees to help the happy mask salesman, and as he leaves the clock tower, the first cycle begins. These first 3 days are the closest thing that Majora's Mask has to a tutorial, but I would still hesitate to call it such, namely because you can't actually do much. The guards will refuse to let you leave town, and there are no enemies to fight outside of 1 or 2 Skulltulas in the sewers. If you're going into this game completely blind, then these first 3 days can feel very intimidating, especially with Tattle constantly reminding you of how much time is left. However, this is also where another one of the game's strongest aspects comes into play: the characters. The characters of Majora's Mask are easily some of the best in the series for how well written they are, especially when compared to the NPCs of previous games. Something that I neglected to bring up in my Ocarina of Time video was how many of its NPCs are kind of pointless to talk to. Some of them are charming to an extent, but they rarely, if ever, say something of value. So, despite reusing so many of Ocarina's characters, it's impressive how Majora's Mask manages to make them significantly better. Every single character in Majora's Mask has a personality and schedule that they follow, and these first 3 days are what allow you to learn that. While you won't get a good look at some of these characters until you tackle some of the side quests later on, you're still able to learn 1 or 2 things about them during this first cycle. This is why the first 3 days of Majora's Mask are designed the way they are. You feel lost, confused, and helpless because you're supposed to. They push the player to talk to the people in town for information. It's by talking to the people around Clocktown that you'll learn how the door to the top of the clock tower only opens at midnight on the eve of the carnival. If you then talk to the members of the Bomber Society and play their game, you'll be able to reach the Astral Observatory. There, you can look through the telescope and see Skull Kid on top of the clock tower. Unless you're following a walkthrough, you probably wouldn't figure this out on your first playthrough without talking to people, which I know is a very scary thought for a lot of you. It's also by talking to people, or just by looking up, that you'll find Termina's moon is both utterly terrifying and, more importantly, going to crash in 3 days. The moon is unquestionably one of the most iconic and memorable things about Majora's Mask for how much of a presence it has throughout the entire game. No matter where you go in Termina, the moon will always be visible, a constant reminder that your time is limited. Eventually, midnight arrives on the final day, and the door to the top of the clock tower opens. Once Link and Tattle get to the top, Tail tells them to visit the swamp, mountain, ocean, and canyon to find the 4 who are there and bring them here. However, it quickly becomes clear that there is nothing Link can do to stop the moon. But upon recovering the stolen Ocarina of Time, Link plays the Song of Time and brings him and Tattle back to the dawn of the first day. The duo then meet with the Happy Mask Salesman, who teaches Link the Song of Healing. This returns Link to his original form and creates the Deku Mask, which allows him to turn into a Deku Scrub at will. Unfortunately though, Link was unable to hold up his end of the bargain and retrieve the Happy Mask Salesman's mask, which causes the salesman to crash out accordingly. He explains to Link that the mask the Skull Kid stole and is now wearing is called Majora's Mask, and it contains an accursed power that could bring devastation upon Termina. With the stakes now set, Tattle suggests that they visit the 4 regions Tail mentioned to find the 4 who are waiting there, starting with the swamp. As Link makes his way through Termina Field towards the swamp, Tattle notices a drawing on a nearby tree. She reminisces about how she and Tail first met Skull Kid and became friends, only for everything to change once he stole Majora's Mask from the Happy Mask Salesman. Remember this, we'll come back to it. From here, the story doesn't primarily focus on stopping Skull Kid until the very end of the game. Instead, it shifts focus to the different parts of the world and finding out who Tail was talking about. All 4 regions of Termina were cursed by the Skull Kid, with the inhabitants of those regions suffering as a result. In the southern swamp, the water turned poisonous and the Deku Princess has gone missing. The Deku King plans on punishing a monkey by burning him alive because he believes that the monkey is responsible for the princess's disappearance. In actuality, the monkey was helping the princess investigate the cause of the water turning poisonous when she was kidnapped by a monster, but the king is too angry to listen to reason. In the Snowhead Mountains, the Gorons are suffering from a never-ending winter. Their hero, Darmani, went to fight the monster at Snowhead responsible for the blizzard, but the strong winds blew him off the cliff, and he fell to his death. Now he wanders the earth as a spirit, forced to watch his fellow Gorons suffer while being unable to do anything about it. In Great Bay, a violent tempest has thrown the ocean into chaos. The Zora hero and the guitarist of the Indigogos, Mikau, was left mortally wounded after trying to retrieve the eggs of the band's singer, Lulu, from some pirates who stole them. And then in Icona Valley, everything is just f***ed. Like, the river has dried up, the dead have free reign of the place. It's all just f***ed, man. By entering each of the 4 temples found throughout Termina and defeating the monsters inside, Link is able to put an end to the curses afflicting these regions and help the people who live there. However, they weren't the only ones affected by the Skull Kid's actions. After completing each temple, Link and Tattle meet one of the 4 giants, the guardian deities of Termina, and the ones that Tail told the duo to find. They teach Link a song called The Oath to Order, and tell him to call upon them for their help. Once all 4 temples have been completed, you can go back to the clock tower, confront Skull Kid, and finish the game. However, you are doing the game a massive disservice if you only do the main story. Because where Majora's Mask truly shines is unquestionably in its side content. We'll come back to the end of the story later in the video, since this is the point where it feels the most appropriate to start discussing other important aspects. You know, like the actual game. When compared to Ocarina of Time, Link's main gameplay hasn't changed all that much. Outside of now doing some sweet flip-a-dip-dips when jumping from a ledge, he plays pretty much the same as he did in the previous game. However, Link now has new tools at his disposal in the form of masks. The masks are technically a returning gimmick from Ocarina of Time, but they've been greatly expanded upon. While some are incredibly situational or literally useless outside of a certain endgame quest, others provide Link with new abilities to help him on his quest to save Termina. In total, there are 24 masks to obtain, 5 of which physically transform Link and change the way he plays. The 3 masks you'll be using the most in your playthrough are the Deku, Goron, and Zora masks. The Deku mask turns Link into a Deku Scrub, and it's probably my least favorite of the transformations. His only forms of attack on the ground are a spin attack that usually only stuns enemies, and a bubble that he can blow for ranged attacks at the cost of magic. Deku Link's other 2 abilities include the ability to skip across water and the ability to use Deku Flowers to launch himself in the air and glide around. While all of this is cool, the Deku Mask doesn't see a whole lot of use after the first dungeon, which is kind of a shame. The Goron Mask, holding the soul of the Goron hero Darmani, turns Link into a Goron. His primary attack is a strong, fiery punch that deals a hefty amount of damage to enemies. He can also curl into a ball and perform a ground pound, which can be used to clear out groups of enemies or activate certain switches. While curled into a ball, Link can also roll around, which allows him to get up steep inclines. It also allows him to move at a high speed and damage anything in his path, albeit at the cost of magic. Being a Goron also grants Link increased strength, allowing him to push large blocks, and the ability to walk across lava. Finally, there's the Zora Mask, which houses the soul of the Zora warrior Mikau. Wearing it turns Link into a Zora, granting him the ability to effortlessly move through bodies of water. As his main attack, Zora Link primarily uses his fins like blades to slice at enemies, but they can also be used like boomerangs to hit far-off switches and stun enemies. While swimming, Link can also use magic to create an electric shield that damages enemies around him. In the 3DS version, this doubles as allowing him to swim faster, while in the N64 version, this swim speed was his default. Thank God for Project Restoration. Outside of these 3 masks, the others will vary in use. Some are useful throughout the entire game, like the Bunny Hood, which doubles your running speed and makes getting around so much better than in Ocarina of Time. Others, like the Troop Leader's Mask, or Circus Leader's Mask if you're playing the N64 version, are virtually useless. While you can use this mask to stop the Gorman brothers from attacking Cremia's milk shipment, the mask can only be obtained after you do this. The 3DS version does, however, add a new quest that allows you to use this mask to get a 7th empty bottle that isn't present in the N64 version, so I can't really call it completely useless. Outside of the masks, the other main gameplay gimmick is obviously the 3-day cycle. Each day is somewhat different from the one before it in the sense of what's available for you to do. Some quests can only be done on or before a certain day, and if you miss your opportunity in this cycle, then you'll have to try again on the next one. When you run out of time, you can play the Song of Time to reset back to the dawn of the first day. In the N64 version, this was also the only way to save your progress, which is something that I'm admittedly not that big a fan of. While you could save at owl statues, they were more like quick saves that would disappear once you loaded them again. The 3DS version did change this by allowing the player to permanently save their progress at owl statues, but they removed the ability to save with the Song of Time. By returning to the dawn of the first day, all the progress you made on quests or in dungeons is completely reset, since you're traveling back to a point in time where you never did those things. However, this doesn't mean that you lose progress on dungeons and quests that you've completed. Key items such as masks, boss remains, songs, and dungeon items are kept with you when you reset the cycle, but consumables like arrows, Deku Nuts, and rupees will be lost. In the case of rupees, however, you can store them in the bank where they'll remain until you withdraw them. How it's possible that rupees you deposit in your account on the final day can then be withdrawn on the first day, I have no idea. The time limit is where the main challenge of Majora's Mask comes from. You have to manage your time effectively and see what you can and can't get done on the current cycle. You want to try and get as much done as possible in one cycle, but you don't want to overdo it to the point where you're racing to get things done in the final hours. The best example of this is the quests leading up to the dungeons. These can be fairly time-consuming if you don't know what you're doing. I'll use Great Bay as an example here. To get to the temple, you first have to do the Pirate's Fortress mini-dungeon to get the 4 Zora eggs, the hookshot, and a picture of one of the pirates for the fisherman. How long this can take depends on how many bottles you have and whether or not you have the stone mask, which makes the whole thing a lot easier. In the N64 version, you can get the stone mask before the mini-dungeon by talking to the invisible soldier in Ikana, but in the 3DS version, he's now found inside the mini-dungeon. Once you complete the Pirate Fortress, you'll then have to go to Pinnacle Rock to get the 3 remaining Zora eggs, bring them to the Marine Research Lab, learn the new wave Bossa Nova, and play it for Lulu. By the time you finish all this, it's likely around the morning or afternoon of the second day, assuming you didn't use the Song of Reverse Time to slow down time. This ultimately leaves you with a choice. Do you try to do the dungeon on this cycle and risk running out of time, or do you save the dungeon for the next cycle to give yourself the most time possible to get it done? There is no right answer to this question because it solely comes down to what you want to do with your time. If this is your first playthrough, you might choose to use your remaining time to get other things done, like the Oceanside Spider House for the Giant's Wallet, or racing the Beaver Bros for another bottle and a piece of heart. But if you played the game before, you might choose to try and complete the dungeon on this cycle. This is one of the things I love about Majora's Mask. While the dungeons need to be completed in a certain order, the player is given so much freedom to do what they want when it comes to the side quests and collectibles because of the 3-day cycle. Opponents of this system will argue that the time limit creates unnecessary stress and severely limits the number of things you can do in one cycle. Well, good. That's the point. The 3-day cycle is meant to be stressful because time is an inherently stressful concept. The clock at the bottom of your screen will never leave, save for during cutscenes and one part at the end of the game we'll touch on later. There is no point where you can stop time and give yourself a second to breathe because that's not how time works. Like I said earlier, the challenge of Majora's Mask comes from managing your time effectively. How much can you get done on this cycle before you have to reset? And more importantly, can you conquer the overwhelming pressure that's pushed on you in order to save this world from destruction? Back in the section about the game's development, I mentioned how Shigeru Miyamoto wanted Majora's Mask to have a greater emphasis on side content than Ocarina of Time. This was because he wanted the game to have a greater depth that players likely wouldn't see on their first playthrough. Looking at Majora's Mask with this statement in mind, it's pretty safe to say that Miyamoto's wishes for the game were absolutely fulfilled. Majora's Mask is a game that thrives on its side content. So much so that I don't think you've truly completed the game until you've done everything. To those who haven't played the game before, this probably sounds a lot like padding. Majora's Mask is already fairly short by Zelda game standards, so all these side quests, collectibles, and minigames were put in to make it feel a lot longer than it actually is. To an extent, this assumption is somewhat correct. But it's also worth pointing out that Majora's Mask was one of the first games to really emphasize side quests to this degree. Nowadays, a lot of remakes of games from this era have gone out of their way to place a greater emphasis on side quests that aren't just fetch quests. Two of the best examples that I can think of from recent memory are Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. Majora's Mask was by no means the first game to have detailed side quests like this, but it was one of the games that started to push the idea that side quests could have their own stories to them instead of just being, go here and kill X amount of monsters. Another reason Majora's Mask makes this work so well is its writing. As I mentioned previously, almost every character has their own personality and schedule. What I neglected to mention was the fact that many of them also have their own problems that they're dealing with in addition to the moon. Even though the world is ending, they can't just stop focusing on their day-to-day lives and the problems that they face. And that's where these side quests come in. The side quests of Majora's Mask are what makes these characters so memorable. Almost everyone is dealing with a very human problem. Kamaro, for example, passed away before he could spread his teachings, and now he wanders the earth as a restless soul that doesn't want to be forgotten. Grog in Romani Ranch seems content with his fate should the moon fall, but he's regretful that he'll never be able to see his beloved Kukos grow up. The bomb shop owner worries for his mother's safety while she's bringing back a shipment of big bomb bags through North Clocktown, which she calls a dangerous place. Romani is worried about the aliens that are coming to abduct the ranch's cows. Wait, you haven't had to deal with that last one? Oh, well, aren't you lucky? And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Anju and Cafe quest. This is undoubtedly the most iconic quest in Majora's Mask, and that's for good reason. For a brief summary, two lovers in Clocktown, Anju and Cafe, are set to be married on the day of the carnival. However, there's a bit of a problem because Cafe goes missing. When talking to his mother in the mayor's office on the first day, Link finds out that he's been missing for almost a month at this point, and his wedding is in, you guessed it, 3 days. After a bit of detective work, Link finds out that Cafe was turned into a child by the Skull Kid, and to make matters worse, a piece of thief named Sakan stole the sun mask that he was going to exchange with Anju on their wedding day. He's too ashamed to confront Anju without his precious mask, so he's been hiding in the back room of the curiosity shop, waiting to see if Sakan will show up. He gives Link his pendant to give to Anju, who, upon receiving it, decides to stay in Clocktown on the final night and wait for Cafe. Eventually, Link helps Cafe infiltrate Sakan's hideout in Icona through a sequence that sees the player control both Link and Cafe as they race the mask down a conveyor belt. Cafe manages to get the sun mask back, and he races to meet Anju in Clocktown. With only a few hours left until the moon crashes, Cafe reunites with Anju, and the two exchange their promised masks. With the couple reunited, they urge Link to seek shelter, telling him that they'll remain where they are to greet the morning together. Cinema. It is easily one of the most involved quests in the game and the series as a whole due to how many steps there are, how many characters it connects, and how it puts some of the game's main themes on display. There are multiple points throughout the quest where the game showcases how mature its themes are when compared to previous games, especially Ocarina of Time. It is truly beautiful to see these two star-crossed lovers reunited against all odds and then accept their fate together. If you ask me, the Anju and Cafe quest is the embodiment of hope in a hopeless situation. It shows us how hope shines brightest in the dark when nothing's ever seen, lighting these undiscovered places that no one's ever been. Of course, I also feel obligated to mention another one of my favorite quests in the game, the Romani Ranch quest. While I slightly joked about it a minute ago, this quest also feels very personal and down to earth, especially with the conversations you can have with the characters involved. The first half of the quest has you helping Romani defend the ranch from an invading horde of aliens who want to abduct the cows. Obviously, her older sister Cremia doesn't believe her because she's just a little kid with a wild imagination. But if you go to Romani Ranch on the night of the first day, you'll find out that Romani was right. If you fail to defend the barn, the aliens will abduct the cows and Romani, with Romani being returned on the third day, but noticeably different. If you talk to Cremia on either the second or third day, she expresses her regret for not listening to her sister, wondering if things would be different if she had done so. But if you successfully defend the barn, then you're able to help Cremia bring a shipment of milk to Clocktown and learn more about everything she's dealing with. Ever since her father passed away, Cremia has had to deal with both managing the ranch and raising Romani all by herself. You also learn how these quests interconnect with the Anju and Cafe quest. Cremia is Anju's best friend, but by talking to Romani, you learn that Cremia has a crush on Cafe. This goes even deeper, because if you eavesdrop on the conversation with Anju and her mother after giving Anju the pendant on the second day, you'll learn that Anju's mother believes that Cafe ran off with Cremia instead. Why? Because Anju's father abandoned their family to run away with another woman. Finally, if you visit Romani Ranch on the final night, Romani says that Cremia is going to give her the ranch's signature drink, Chateau Romani, for the first time and wants Romani to sleep with her in her bed that night, but she doesn't understand why. This is because Chateau Romani is described on multiple occasions as a drink for adults and can only be purchased from a bar, which implies that it's most likely alcoholic. Cremia is giving her little sister the ranch's signature drink because she believes that Romani will never get to try it as an adult. You don't get this level of depth from side quests in any other game in the series. Before Majora's Mask, the most involved side quest in the series was the trading sequence for the Bigoron sword. No other game in the series had side quests and characters with this many layers before Majora's Mask, and it's because of Majora's Mask that we've gotten other great side quests in future games. But ultimately, the reason why I choose to do everything whenever I replay Majora's Mask is simply that it feels good to do so. For me, it feels good to try to help as many people as I can. Because of how well written these characters are and how human their struggles are, I'd feel bad if I left any quest unfinished. If I don't help these people with their problems, then who will? By going out of your way to help the people of Termina, you give them one of the most important things you can ever give to someone who is struggling: hope. You can help these people feel happy at a time when it seems impossible to be, and this is conveyed through the masks they give you. Every mask you obtain throughout your journey in Termina is a reminder of the people you helped, one that is so strong that it will stay with you even after you reset the clock. By freeing Pamela's father of his curse and letting a little girl see her father again, you get the Gibdo mask. By chasing after the Deku butler and reminding him of the times he played with his son, you get the Mask of Sense. By stopping that piece of Sakon from stealing the old woman's delivery, you get the Blast Mask. By just listening to Guru's confession, you get the Bremen Mask. Even if the mask is virtually useless from a gameplay standpoint, like the aforementioned Troop Leader's mask, it's still filled with happiness. I think that is a beautiful sentiment, and it's largely come to affect how I view the story of Majora's Mask, but we'll touch on that later. The only other bit of side content that we really need to touch on are the minigames and other side activities. Well, maybe we don't need to touch on them, but I want to be thorough. If you're going for 100%, then you are going to be playing a lot of minigames. There's the Deku Playground in Clocktown, which tests your mastery of the Deku form, and the Beaver Race in Great Bay, which tests your mastery of the Zora form. Neither of them are too hard in my opinion, but it does annoy me a bit that you have to do 4 total races with the Beaver Bros to get both rewards. The 2 spider houses in the Swamp and Great Bay are pretty cool. They bring back the gold Skulltulas from Ocarina of Time and hide them all around these houses. Some of them are pretty well hidden, and the rewards for completing both of them are actually really useful, being the Mask of Truth in the Swamp Spider House and the Giant's Wallet from the Ocean Spider House. The archery minigames, like the Swamp Shooting Gallery and the Octo Shooting Gallery in Clocktown, are definitely more challenging depending on the version you're playing. If you're playing the 3DS version, you'll have access to the more precise gyroscopic aiming, which will allow you to move from target to target quickly. If you're playing the N64 version though, you'll probably be doing these a few times thanks to how clunky the aiming is. Oh, and you'll have to do both of them twice if you want every reward. But of course, I can't mention minigames in Majora's Mask without mentioning everyone's favorite, Goron Racing. On paper, this minigame doesn't sound too bad. Just race some Gorons and come in first. The problem is the fact that the other Gorons have this atrocious rubber banding, meaning they'll always be right behind you. They also love to ram into you and knock you out of your roll, and if that happens or you lose top speed, then you've pretty much lost. While you can recover, it's really not that easy to do so. This minigame genuinely pisses me off. You know how everyone says that the 5 stages of grief are present in Majora's Mask? Well, it's true, because you'll feel all 5 of them when doing this race. By far, one of my favorite parts of Majora's Mask is the dungeons. While there are only 4 to complete, excluding mini-dungeons, all of them feel far more complex than the vast majority of the dungeons in Ocarina of Time. The first dungeon is Woodfall Temple in the Southern Swamp. This dungeon revolves heavily around the use of the Deku Mask, as it's meant to be a test of how well the player has mastered the mechanics. You will be using Deku Flowers to launch yourself in the air and skipping across water on multiple occasions. Unlike the inside of the Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time, Woodfall Temple doesn't necessarily hold your hand. While it is still the first dungeon of the game, it expects players to come in with knowledge of how dungeons work in 3D. Majora's Mask was made for the people who played Ocarina of Time. It was supposed to be a challenge to them, and the puzzles inside reflect that, as they require the logical line of thinking that was seen in many of Ocarina's adult dungeons. A good example of this is the torch puzzles. These kinds of puzzles were used pretty frequently in Ocarina of Time, especially in the child dungeons. Using a Deku Stick, the player will carry a flame from one torch to several unlit torches in the room. Once all are lit, something will happen, like a chest appearing or a door opening. However, Woodfall Temple soon takes these classic puzzles a step further with the introduction of this dungeon's item, the Hero's Bow. The bow is pretty much going to be your best friend throughout the game, since it's used in a good majority of the puzzles going forward. What makes it so unique is the fact that it's one of the only traditional dungeon items in the game, in the sense that the others are obtained outside the 4 main dungeons. The items obtained in the other 3 dungeons are all essentially upgrades to the bow, and I think this is a really neat concept. With the bow now in hand, torches that were previously out of reach with the Deku Stick can now be lit by shooting an arrow through the fire of another torch. This level of puzzle solving wasn't present in Ocarina of Time until the Forest Temple, and Majora's Mask puts it in front of the player after only 2 or 3 hours. Woodfall Temple also reintroduces the player to an optional collectible, Stray Fairies. During your first 3 days in Clocktown, you'll probably come across this little guy floating around. This is a stray fairy, and they're essentially a fragment of a Great Fairy. By taking them to the fairy fountain in North Clocktown, you'll help the Great Fairy reform, and she rewards you with the magic meter on the first cycle and the Great Fairy's mask if you help her again. With this concept in mind, you'll immediately recognize what you have to do upon walking into Woodfall and seeing one. I think that these are some of the best collectibles in any Zelda game for a few reasons. These little guys will be hidden throughout all 4 dungeons, with 15 in each one. By collecting all 15 and bringing them back to their respective Great Fairies, you'll be given some really helpful rewards. What makes Stray Fairies so great is how they actively encourage the player to be aware of their surroundings and explore every nook and cranny. While some may be out in the open, others will be tucked away in chests, hiding in pots, inside of enemies, under platforms, etc, etc. It is absolutely worth it to try and hunt all of these guys down. The boss of this dungeon is the masked jungle warrior, Odolwa. In terms of Zelda bosses, the way you fight him is fairly interesting, since there are technically multiple different ways to fight him. In the N64 version. In this version, Odolwa doesn't have one specific weakness. You can throw bombs at him for extra damage, use the Deku Mask and jump out of flowers, drop Deku Nuts on him, shoot him with the bow at the right time, etc. This makes him stand out from other Zelda bosses, who usually require you to use the recently obtained dungeon item to stun them first. So how did they change the fight in the 3DS version? Simple. They made it so all you have to do is use the Deku Mask to fly above him and drop a Deku Nut on his head. Don't worry about getting hit, because he just stands there, looking confused.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
He was in no way difficult before, so why the developers chose to lobotomize him and make him even easier is beyond me. Thankfully, we have things like Project Restoration to bring back the fun to Majora's Mask 3D. The second dungeon is Snowhead Temple, located north of Clocktown in the Snowhead Mountains. Like Woodfall before it, Snowfall acts as a test of the player's skill with their newly acquired transformation mask, this time being the Goron mask. If it wasn't obvious from all the ice inside, or the dungeon's name, Snowhead Temple is mostly an ice dungeon. As such, there are plenty of rooms with ice physics, pushing block puzzles, and at least one room with a pushing block puzzle with ice physics, because why wouldn't there be? The dungeon also reintroduces the idea of shooting arrows through torches, except this time, you use them to melt large chunks of ice. Unfortunately though, there are many chunks of ice in rooms that don't have torches, so how do you melt them? This is where the fire arrows come in. As mentioned previously, all the dungeon items after Woodfall are essentially upgrades to the bow. However, unlike in Ocarina of Time, the elemental arrows in this game are incredibly useful. The fire arrows are frequently used in puzzles throughout the dungeon, as well as the remainder of the game. At the cost of some magic, the player can use the fire arrows to melt blocks of ice and light torches, or just do some extra damage to enemies. There's also a mini-boss fight against a Wizrobe. Man, he's sure fun. I sure hope we get to fight him again sometime. The dungeon's main puzzle revolves around trying to reach the boss door near the top of the tower. You'll mostly get around the dungeon by either taking the stairs or by jumping across gaps with Goron Link. Eventually, you'll reach a switch that will cause a giant pillar to rise in the central room, but it will completely block you from reaching the boss door. However, you'll probably notice that some sections of the pillar look different. So, if you use Goron Link and punch these segments away, you'll find that the pillar begins to shrink, and by removing all of them, you'll be able to reach the boss door. I think that this is such a neat idea for a puzzle, and I remember feeling really proud of myself after figuring this out when I first played Majora's Mask. After spending like 5 minutes running around trying to figure out what to do, but that's besides the point. It reminds me a lot of Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening, where you had to basically bring the top of the dungeon to you by destroying the pillars. There's also another mini-boss fight against a Wizrobe. Huh. Kinda weird they'd use him twice in the same dungeon. By entering the boss door, you'll come face to face with the game's second boss, the masked mechanical monster, Got. Got is an incredibly easy boss, but he's also really fun. Instead of confronting you head on, Got will run around this massive arena to try and get away from you. This means you'll have to give chase as Goron Link, building up speed so you can catch up to him and bash into him. Once he's knocked down, just wail away at him with the sword or just keep rolling into him. That's pretty much it. The fight does get a little more difficult as it goes on, with Got now kicking up rocks and shooting lightning to try to stop the player from getting close, but it ultimately changes very little. Still though, I have a soft spot for this boss. It's just really cathartic to run into him. The third dungeon is Great Bay Temple, located west of Clocktown in Great Bay. This dungeon is widely considered by many to be one of the worst in the series for being even more confusing than the Water Temple. That being said, Great Bay Temple really isn't as bad as people say. In my opinion, it's genuinely a lot better than the Water Temple. I would probably update my 3D dungeon ranking to put it in B tier. Like the two dungeons before it, Great Bay Temple is meant to test the player's skills with the Zora Mask. The dungeon's main puzzle revolves around routing the flow of water in colored pipes by opening various valves. Once all the valves of the red pipe have been flipped, you can use the flow of water from that pipe to change which direction the large turbine in the central room is spinning, thereby reversing the flow of the whirlpool and allowing you to access the other half of the dungeon. Thematically and aesthetically, Great Bay Temple is leagues better than the Water Temple. The entire thing looks and feels way more interesting, and I love the little detail of how the activated pipes show the water flowing through them. Speaking of the pipes, they aren't just here for show, they actually show you where to go at points. If a pipe isn't activated, try following it and seeing if there's a valve to activate at the end. Don't get me wrong, Great Bay Temple can absolutely be confusing at points, and I got turned around at least once or twice while replaying the game for this video, but it was nowhere near as bad as I remembered it being. The dungeon item is the ice arrows, and once again, they are so much better than they are in Ocarina of Time due to how much utilization they have. For one, you can shoot anywhere in the water to create temporary platforms. You're also able to shoot Octoroks to create large blocks of ice that allow you to reach ledges that you couldn't before. This is such a unique mechanic that allows the player to progress however you want. In the N64 version. Yeah, for whatever reason, they changed it in the 3DS version so that you can only freeze these little sparkly bits of water. It legitimately makes no sense why they did this. Once again, thank God for Project Restoration. Apart from that, ice arrows can also be used to freeze certain water currents. In this room with the scales, you'll have to freeze the water currents that are weighing the opposite side down. But you'll also need to use the fire arrows to unfreeze these currents and help you get higher, which is such an awesome way to keep building on the puzzles introduced in previous dungeons. All in all, Great Bay Temple is a lot better than I remember it being. But I unfortunately can't say the same for the third boss of the game, the gargantuan masked fish, Gjorg. I hate this stupid fish. It is unquestionably the worst of the 4 dungeon bosses. All my homies hate George. Gjorg likes to swim around in his pool. Unfortunately for Gjorg, I hate him, so I stand on the platform, shoot him with my bow over and over and over again until he gets stunned, jump in the water, and damage him with Zora Link's electric barrier. That's it. That's the fight. It is mind-numbingly simple. In the N64 version. Yeah, for once the 3DS version actually makes a boss fight tougher. That's not really saying much because they all kinda suck, but whatever, that's not the point. As mentioned early on in the section about Majora's Mask 3D, all of the bosses in that version now have a giant weak spot in the form of a Majora's Mask looking eyeball. While I think this is a stupid addition overall, I will admit that I kind of like it for the Gjorg fight. In this version of the fight, the stupid fish is a lot easier to see, and when he's stunned, he goes belly up so you can stab his eye. Eventually, Gjorg gets tired of having to deal with a camping sniper, so he rams the platform and causes it to sink, which forces you to fight as Zora Link in a brand new phase. After giving birth, some mines will spawn around the pool. Every now and then, Gjorg will try to inhale you, so make him inhale some explosives instead before electrocuting him. Rinse and repeat until he's sashimi. This fight is still stupidly easy, but it's better than whatever this was. Now before we can head into the final dungeon, you actually have to do 2 mini dungeons, both of which are in Icona Canyon. The first is the bottom of the well, where you have to give a variety of items to the Gibdos guarding the doors. Give them the correct items, and you can proceed to the end where you'll get the mirror shield. Climb out of the well and you'll be in the second mini dungeon, the ancient castle of Icona. This is easily the better of the 2 mini dungeons, focusing on light and reflection puzzles using the newly obtained mirror shield. There's also a mini boss fight against the Wizrobe. Again. I'm starting to sense a pattern here. Once you get to the throne room, you'll be confronted with a mini-boss fight against the undead king of Icona and his 2 strongest soldiers. Up until now, I haven't gone into too much detail about the mini-bosses, but this one is different. This one deserves to be discussed, albeit briefly. The first phase of the fight has you show down against the king's lackeys. They aren't exactly difficult, but you'll quickly find out that you can't defeat them the conventional way. While they eventually drop to the ground after being struck enough times, they will always get back up. However, if you paid attention to the beginning cutscene, you'll notice that the game told you exactly how to beat them. Light. By bringing light back to the throne room, you can now use the mirror shield to reflect it onto the soldiers once they've fallen, completely destroying their remains. Also, as a side note, you can use the Bremen mask here to make them march around. That's not important at all, but I just thought it was a cute detail. Once the king's lackeys fall to the light, you must now fight the king of Icona himself, Egos du Icona. He's a bit harder to deal with than his lackeys, but he goes down the same way. Once you beat Egos du Icona, his lackeys will come back as ghosts and start to bicker with each other. A nice callback to the ending of the Twin Rova boss fight from Ocarina of Time. Egos himself soon returns, shouting at his lackeys that pointless petty squabbles like this are the reason that their kingdom fell and they've been reduced to their current states. Believing in your friends and embracing that belief by forgiving failure. These feelings have vanished from our hearts. It's only after the king and his warriors are shown the light, both physically and metaphorically, that they realize how far they've truly fallen. It's a beautifully poetic fight that perfectly showcases some of the game's main themes, such as healing, forgiveness, and moving on. As a final act before departing, Egos du Icona bestows upon Link the method of reaching the summit of the Stone Tower, the Elegy of Emptiness. By using this song, you'll be able to climb the, admittedly quite annoying, Stone Tower to reach the 4th and final dungeon, Stone Tower Temple. This is easily the game's best dungeon, as well as one of the best dungeons in the series. It is one of, if not, my all-time favorite dungeon, and I'm just gonna use this part to gush about it. This dungeon is essentially the final trial of Majora's Mask, testing everything you've learned while playing the game. You will use all 3 transformation masks to solve puzzles throughout the dungeon, with Link's Goron and Zora forms being used mostly in the first half of the dungeon, while his Deku form gets more time to shine in the second half. More on that later though. Stone Tower Temple also utilizes plenty of light and reflection puzzles, much like the ancient castle of Ikana. The dungeon introduces these mirrors that not only reflect light, but also absorb it. This essentially allows the player to transport beams of light from one side of a room to another. For example, in this room full of mirrors, the player will have to use the mirror shield to charge certain mirrors with light. They can then run to that mirror and reflect the light onto another mirror, then run to the second mirror and reflect the light onto a sunblock, making it disappear. I love puzzles like this in Zelda games. Reflection puzzles are always so satisfying to figure out, and it was this dungeon that made me realize that. The final dungeon item is the Light Arrow, which is not only used to solve certain light puzzles, but also to activate one of the best dungeon puzzles in the series. Once you get the light arrows by defeating the Garo Master, you want to leave the dungeon and shoot the big red gem out front to flip the entire dungeon upside down. With the world completely flipped, you now have to backtrack through rooms you've already been in, but now at a completely different angle. There are new paths you can take and hazards to watch out for, like the sky below you. The mechanic of flipping the dungeon is also now used in some puzzles. For example, in this block pushing puzzle, you'll need to flip the dungeon repeatedly to get the block to the other side of the room to weigh down a switch. Doing so opens a door where— oh god fucking damn it! Are you serious? 4 times! Whose idea was this? I know the developers only had a year to make the game, but they seriously thought reusing the same mini-boss 4 times was a good idea? And the best part? This isn't even the last time you have to fight him. You have to fight this Wizrobe for a 5th fucking time in the secret shrine for one of the last few pieces of heart in the game. It would be one thing if the fight was a little different each time, but no! It's just the same fight every single time, just with a few extra platforms for him to teleport to. God! I'm not even exaggerating when I say that I forgot that you fought the Wizrobe this many times. I'm obviously overreacting for the bit, but like, what was the thought process here? Why did they decide to reuse this guy 5 times throughout the game? You know what? Let's just move on. Justified rant aside, Stone Tower Temple also has one more item to give the player, which, depending on the version, is completely optional: the Giant's Mask. In the N64 version, the Giant's Mask is optional, but worth grabbing to collect every mask in the game. In the 3DS version, however, the Giant's Mask is given to you during the second phase of the fight with the 4th dungeon boss, the giant masked insect, Twinmold. Like the other bosses before it, Twinmold isn't a great fight, but it is far better in the N64 version due to how the Giant's Mask works. While optional, the Giant's Mask makes the Twinmold fight significantly easier by turning Link into a giant and allowing you to use your sword to fight the 2 worms. While you could remain small and use your bow to fight them, it made the fight much harder due to only their tails being vulnerable. In the 3DS version, however, the Giant's Mask and the fight as a whole were changed completely. In the first phase, you have to fight the worms in your regular form, except you can only fight the blue worm. Every now and then, it'll fly overhead and show some giant weak points that you need to shoot. Shooting all of them will make the worm crash to the ground and spit out its main weak point, the stupid f***ing eye. The thing is, you'll have to run over to it in order to slash it with your sword, and when it hits the ground, it doesn't stop moving. It's definitely easier to hit it with the bow, but like, I wanted to stab it. Once you defeat the blue worm, you're given the Giant's Mask to fight the red one. When you put it on, you now move significantly slower and can only attack with your fists. This can make attacking the remaining worm a lot more tedious than it needs to be, since it moves a bit faster than you. And of course, you have to make sure you don't run out of magic. This was the one fight that Project Restoration couldn't remove the stupid eye weak point from because of how drastically this version changed the fight from the original. To the 3DS version's credit though, You can put the worm in a headlock and swing it around like you're playing Mario 64. I know I spent a long time talking about the dungeons, but to be completely honest, I just couldn't help myself. Every single dungeon in Majora's Mask is absolutely fantastic. Each one is meticulously crafted in a way that makes it challenging to complete, but so rewarding to do so. And the rewards for collecting all 15 stray fairies in each dungeon are just the cherry on top. The Woodfall Fairy gives you the upgraded spin attack, the Snowhead Fairy doubles your magic meter, the Great Bay Fairy doubles your defense, and the Icona Fairy gives you the Great Fairy Sword, one of the strongest weapons in the game. But the thing I love the most about the dungeons in Majora's Mask is the fact that they put forth the idea of the dungeon itself being the puzzle. Most of the dungeons in Ocarina of Time felt like a series of rooms that housed puzzles, but the 4 dungeons of Majora's Mask all play with the idea of manipulating a core part of the dungeon itself, making it feel like one big puzzle. The only dungeon in Ocarina of Time that really plays with this idea is the Water Temple, which, while really good, ultimately suffered from poor design choices in some areas in the N64 version. While Ocarina of Time has more dungeons, the dungeons of Majora's Mask feel better designed. Quality takes precedence over quantity. But now, with all 4 dungeons completed, there's still one thing left to do. After repeating the same 3 days several times, Link and Tattle finally managed to free all 4 giants. With the guardian deities of Termina on their side, the Skull Kid will be defeated easily. But something is wrong. Tattle notes that the voices of the giants sound sad. After the duo freed the 3rd giant in Great Bay Temple, the deities asked Link and Tattle to help their friend. Now, with the 4th giant freed, they give one final message to the duo: forgive your friend. Confused by the giant's message, the duo prepares for their final confrontation with Skull Kid. Once more, the clock tower opens at midnight on the final day, and Link and Tattle climb to the top, ready to stop the Skull Kid once and for all. As he uses his power to bring the moon down and finally destroy Termina, Link pulls out the Ocarina of Time and plays the Oath to Order. Hearing their song, the 4 giants rise from the corners of Termina and march towards Clock Town. As the 4 deities surround the town, they use their immense strength to hold back the crashing moon, refusing to let any harm befall the land they swore to protect. And with their combined strength, the moon stops falling. Termina is safe. I suppose a bit of an explanation is in order about the giants and Skull Kid. If it wasn't already obvious, the friend that the giants asked Link and Tattle to help was the Skull Kid. This is hinted at multiple points throughout the story, most notably during the cutscene where Tattle recalls how she and Tail met Skull Kid. See, I told you we'd come back to it. When Tattle sees the drawing that the Skull Kid made on the day he met the fairy siblings, she says that the Skull Kid had gotten into a fight with his friends. The other point where this is hinted at is during a story about the creation of Termina that's read to Link by Anju's grandmother. In the story, it's said that when the 4 giants departed to make the 4 worlds, those being the 4 regions of Termina, they swore to protect the people of Termina whenever they were called upon. However, their departure upset one of their friends, an imp. In retaliation, the imp began to spread mischief and misfortune across the land, so the people of Termina called upon the giants to help them. As the protectors of Termina, the giants were forced to threaten the imp with their wrath, banishing him to the heavens beyond, which is likely Hyrule. If it wasn't already obvious, Skull Kid is the imp in the story. He believed that the giants had abandoned him, especially after they banished him. Later on, he met Tattle and Tail and became friends with the fairy siblings. The trio would go on to make mischief together, which led them to prank a traveling salesman in the woods just outside of Termina and steal a strange-looking mask. Using the power granted to him by Majora's Mask, Skull Kid would curse the lands of Termina and imprison the 4 giants within the temples. That way, no one would be able to stop him from destroying the world that had wronged him. Or so he had thought. Could I have explained all this earlier? Yeah. With the end of the world successfully stopped, Tattle and Tail finally reunite. She then rightfully shouts at Skull Kid for almost destroying the world, but to her surprise, Tail jumps to the Skull Kid's defense. He claims that it was the mask that made him do it. Yeah, sure, like anyone's gonna believe that. Holy shit! In a twist that genuinely shocked me in my very first playthrough, it's revealed that this entire time, Majora's Mask has been alive. Breaking off from Skull Kid, the mask retreats into the moon and takes control of it, pushing against the four giants. Without a moment to lose, Link gives chase into the moon, leading to one of the most surreal and confusing moments in the entire series. The inside of the moon is a lush, grassy field that seems to go on forever. In the middle, a lone tree sits atop a hill. As you approach the tree, you'll see that there are 5 children, 4 running around and a 5th sitting all by themselves. The children running around the tree all wear masks of the bosses that you faced, and each one will demand an increasing number of masks. Each one presents you with a mini dungeon to complete. One for Deku Link, one for Goron Link, one for Zora Link, and one for regular Link. When you reach the end of each one, you're confronted with one of the Moon Children. Once you give them more of your hard-earned masks, they ask you a series of increasingly strange and personal questions. Your friends. What kind of people are they? I wonder, do those people think of you as a friend? You. What makes you happy? I wonder, what makes you happy? Does it make others happy too? The right thing. What is it? I wonder, if you do the right thing, does it really make everybody happy? Your true face. What kind of face is it? I wonder, the face under the mask. Is that your true face? After giving up every mask, the child who had been sitting by themselves, the one wearing Majora's mask, is the only one left. They ask Link if he'd like to play a game with them, only to point out that he has no mask left to share. So, they propose a different game. Good guys versus bad guys. And they give Link the Fierce Deity's mask. This is the most broken item in the entire series, and I love it. The Fierce Deity's mask turns Link into an absolute beast, able to shred through the final boss in less than a minute. It turns what is supposed to be the final challenge standing between the player and beating the game into an absolute joke. And while I think that this is one of the greatest completion rewards in any Zelda game, I do have to admit that it's a bit disappointing Majora doesn't put up more of a fight. If they ever do remake Majora's Mask again, and I'm just thinking out loud here, after a rumored remake of Ocarina of Time for the Switch 2, then I'd like to see them add either a hero mode that makes the game harder, or revamp the bosses to pose more of a challenge. But, Fierce Deity's mask or not, after a final battle that made me question Michael Jackson's canonicity in the Zelda universe, Link finally defeats Majora, completely and utterly destroying it. As the moon vanishes, the people of Termina cheer, knowing that their lives have been saved. Link wakes up in Termina Field to find the Skull Kid looking up at the giants, feeling ashamed of what he'd done. Yet despite this, he finds that they still view him as their friend. They always had. As the giants leave, Skull Kid turns his attention to Link, noting that he smells like a certain fairy kid who taught him a song in the woods. He asks if Link will be his friend, but both he and the young hero are caught off guard by the happy masked salesman's voice. The salesman holds Majora's mask, remarking that the evil has left the mask and seems almost disappointed by it. Whatever the reason, he thanks Link for retrieving the mask and begins to depart, but not before delivering one of the most beautiful lines in the entire series. Whenever there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever. Whether a parting be forever or merely for a short time, that is up to you. And with that, he disappears. Tattle says her goodbyes to Link, thanking him for all he's done. And as the hero of time departs, the people of Termina celebrate the dawn of a new day. God, I love this game. I love this game so much. I love watching the credits. Unlike other Zelda games, what you see in the credits of Majora's Mask depends on how much you did. If you completed the main side quests and collected every mask, you get to see how the people you helped are living their lives. Every single person shown in the credits is only there because you helped them. Thanks to you, Kamaro's dance has been passed down and is now being performed by the Rosa sisters. Thanks to you, the cows of Romani Ranch are safe, and Romani herself will be prepared for the next invasion. Thanks to you, the curse afflicting Pamela's father was broken, and the two are living safe and sound. Thanks to you, Anju and Cafe got their happy ending. Almost everyone got their happy ending. Almost. While replaying Majora's Mask for this video, there was a comment that I had received on my video ranking every Zelda game that I couldn't get out of my head. I went back to look for this comment so I could give the commenter proper credit, but no matter how hard I looked, it was gone. Whether they just deleted it or I completely missed it, I don't know. Whatever the case, I owe that person a huge thank you, because they changed how I view Majora's Mask. With that context out of the way, this commenter said that to them, Majora's Mask was like a Rorschach test. You know, those inkblot images that psychologists will show to their patients and ask them what they see. And honestly, I don't think I've ever heard a better description of what is, without a doubt, the strangest Zelda game in the series. At face value, the story of Majora's Mask is incredibly simple. An imp wearing an evil mask is threatening to destroy the world, so Link relives the same 3 days over and over again to find a way to stop him. However, it's when you start to take a deeper look at everything that it all becomes so much more confusing. Even after being out for over 26 years at the time of this video's release, no one can give a definitive answer on what Majora's Mask is about because there are just so many interpretations. Some see a story about grief and dealing with loss. Others see a lesson in forgiveness. It can be read as an exploration of trauma and the road to recovery, or as an allegory for finding self-worth. Is it Link's own journey of self-discovery, or him coming to terms with the fact that he's growing up? Was any of it even real? Was it all a dream? Is it all an allegory for the Buddhist belief of samsara? Is Link dead? This is why we're still talking about Majora's Mask so many years later. People take different meanings from the various elements in the game's story, characters, and world to create their own interpretations of what was presented to them. While some people may see the same thing that you did, others may see something completely different, and that should be expected, because in my opinion, there is no single definitive message to Majora's Mask. The game is packed full of different themes, messages, and symbols that I'm convinced almost every interpretation of what Majora's Mask is supposed to represent is correct in some way. And that's what makes this game so special. The lack of concrete answers pushes people to find their own. There are still so many questions left unanswered. Who was the ancient tribe that made Majora's Mask? What happened between the kingdom of Ikana and the Garrow? Why do all the moon children resemble the happy mask salesman? What are Majora and the fierce deity? These questions are the reason I keep coming back, and every time I do, I'm reminded of how and why the story and themes of Majora's Mask have continued to stay with me over a decade after I first played it. It genuinely feels like every time I play this game, I come out with a newfound appreciation for some aspect I hadn't put much thought into before. All of this is to say, after replaying the game twice within the span of a month for this video, I have developed my own interpretation/theory of what the events of Majora's Mask mean, and I want to share those thoughts with you to finally wrap up this behemoth of a video. While there are countless themes and messages present within Majora's Mask, there's always been one that stood out to me the most: hope. More specifically, the theme of finding hope in a hopeless place. Even though the moon bears down on Termina, the people can't just stop what they're doing to focus on it. Everyone is dealing with their own problems that don't just magically disappear because of a far greater problem. If anything, these problems just stack and stack and stack, creating a massive weight that threatens to crush them. Moments like these can create overwhelming feelings of dread, despair, and hopelessness that just seem impossible to escape. By doing the various quests throughout the game, you help the people of Termina in their darkest times and give them the hope that things will get better. You don't help these people out of the expectation of a reward, you help them because it feels gratifying to do so. In times when the people around you are struggling, sometimes the best you can do is to just be there for them. Be their shoulder to cry on, help them with a task, do what you can to be their hope. In Majora's Mask, the hope and happiness that you give to the people of Termina is represented in the form of the masks they give you. The masks that you collect throughout your journey are full of happiness, and that happiness is so strong that it follows you back in time to be a constant reminder that yes, you made a difference. And by collecting every mask in the game, by making a difference in the lives of as many people of Termina as you can, you become the hero they see you as, the fierce deity. When asked about whose soul was contained within the fierce deity's mask, Eiji Aonuma said the following: "The best I can give you is just a suggestion. The best way to think about it is that the memories of all the people of Termina are inside of the fierce deity's mask. The fierce deity's mask is the culmination of all your hard work and effort throughout the game to improve the lives of the people of Termina. When Link puts on the mask, he is flooded with the hopes, dreams, and memories of those he's helped as it transforms him into a stronger version of himself. He, and by extension you, the player, become the embodiment of Termina's hope. You become a true hero. But even after doing absolutely everything you can, the most depressingly human aspect of Majora's Mask is just the simple fact that you can't save everyone. You can't reunite the Deku Butler and his son. You can't bring Darmani back to life. You can't save Mikau. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, there will always be someone you can't help. So try to help those you can. Not everyone has to meet with a terrible fate, and neither do you. Sometimes the best way to be a hero is to improve your situation before doing the same for the people around you. Majora's Mask is a game of many themes: grief, healing, forgiveness, and plenty more that I'm probably forgetting. But in my eyes, one of the strongest messages it sends is the simplest. You don't need to go on a grand quest to be a hero. You don't need to pull a legendary sword, fight monsters, or save a princess. Sometimes, the best way to be a hero is to just be there for someone. Give them the hope they need to keep moving forward. Because while each day may look bleaker than the last, you can give someone a reason to keep going, so that eventually, you'll both be greeted by the dawn of a new day.